The following is a presentation of NoVA Hackers at ShmooCon Epilogue 2014, hosted by Mach37, brought to you by ComputeCycle.
Hi, my name is Sean Pierce. I'm a malware analyst for iSight Partners. And today I wanted to present to you something I've been working on for a little bit as a personal project. And I've turned it into a game that I call GuessWhat. And it's really for training malware analysts. So a little bit of background about malware, and I'm being very general here. The early malware that was written way back when was mostly for fun, and it was to show off for, basically like, the virus infects you and then, pretty things pop across your screen. It wasn't meant to be malicious. It wasn't meant to steal your data. It wasn't meant to do anything but really be an experiment or really show people that you know a lot about your computer. And as things evolved, more and more people started getting into malware, developing it for profit, for making money, stealing information and selling it, or stealing access and selling that access, or banking credentials and stuff like that. And it's getting more and more into cyber espionage. But when it got into a profitable state, malware analysts like myself would, of course, try to analyze the malware, feel out where it's coming from, or trying to determine why it was written or what it's going after. And this can be done through techniques like reverse engineering or popping it into a VM and just executing it. And that's all well and good, but it doesn't take much time for someone like me to take a generic piece of malware and say, oh, it's going after all your credentials for banking, and here's the websites that it watches for, or it scans your hard drive for credit card credentials or stuff like that. Not credentials, but credit card information. So to avoid automated analysis, a lot of malware writers started adding in defense mechanisms to the malware. So determine if it's in a VM, and if it's not, run normally. If it is, die, or take a crap on the logs, or do something crazy, or download the wrong, or try to contact the wrong C2, or command and control server. And these defense mechanisms I've kind of been collecting and watching and analyzing since I was a researcher about 2 years ago. So I started putting them all together and actually developing high-level code for them, or grabbing stuff off the internet and just putting it together as a personal reversing project. So these defense mechanisms are in different categories, like anti-debugging, or anti-VM, or anti-crypto, or not anti-crypto, but using cryptography and communication with the command and control server. So you may be wondering, well, why would a piece of malware care about if it's being debugged? Well, debuggers, can look into the memory, it can see what is being executed, it can see the APIs being called, it can see exactly what the malware is doing and when it is doing it. So debuggers are a popular thing to defend against for malware. And there's lots and lots and lots of techniques, and I'm just covering the major ones, the most common ones seen in malware. So the thing I've developed, this thing I call GuessWhat, is a game. And the aim of the game is to find the malware on your computer and extract the secret. So it's a key, it's a string, you find it, it's encrypted. So the main reason for this is to educate people like myself coming into the field what these common defense mechanisms are and how to bypass them. So, when you're playing the game, you can use it however you want. You can use any tools. You need to bypass the anti-debugging. You need to bypass the anti-VM techniques and figure out what kind of crypto is used and break it to find the secret. Like I said, it started as a personal reversing project. I just started throwing all this high-level code into this big .c file, and I would just compile it and see the assembly and compare it to the malware I've seen before. And I was just trying to say, okay, this is common behavior for malware. Install as a service, or put yourself in the auto-run registry key, blah, blah, blah. And the code that I'm releasing does not have a payload. It doesn't do anything malicious. It does not have a keylogger. It does not try to contact anyone in the real world. So it should be pretty benign. So obviously there's a lot of, these techniques have been around for a long time, for many, many years, and a number of really cool people have enumerated most of them, or enumerated the ones that just really worked, and I've ripped them off. So like Paranoid Fish, Scoopy NG, it's like for anti-VM. A really, really good one was presented at DEF CON, scientific but non-academic study of how malware employs anti-debugging, anti-disassembly, anti-reversing technologies, etc., etc. So those guys are really cool. So I divide this thing up, as a good software engineer does, into components that, so persistence.cpp, communication.cpp, anti-debugging.cpp, etc., etc. And, it's easy to add to it, and it's really meant to, like I said, educate people about how these things work. So if you actually try to take this thing apart with a tool like IDA Pro that you can download for free, then you can say, oh, that's really easy to see. It just calls this function, and voila, it tries to do this check and it returns true or false. It's easy to bypass, but the whole idea was you get used to seeing the disassembly of, making a specific API call or doing something weird, like, checking certain registers or checking certain parts of memory for evidence of a VM or evidence of a certain tool being used. So this thing, you can obviously use it however you want, but if you have like a -I for install, then it will go through the system directory and find a file or make something look like a system file and install itself there. So it'll randomly insert itself into the system somewhere, and you have to find it, and you have to, take it apart. So in a very, very easy to understand way, if you just were to execute it, it would choose some random behavior, some random disassembly technique, anti-disassembly techniques. It would choose some random anti-VM techniques, and so on and so forth. But if you just want to very specifically ask it, hey, can you employ this technique, then you can do that. So here at the bottom, it's asking, hey, can you please use the third persistence technique or the fifth anti-debugging technique, and et cetera, et cetera. And feel free to just yell out if you have questions. Much more interactive presenter. So I have quite a few anti-debugging tricks. They're all well-known, publicly available, and they range from the easiest, with a single API call is being debugged, to checking, down at the bottom for interrupt instructions. Like x86 will have, debuggers will use these interrupts that say, oh, you want to stop at this line of code. It inserts that instruction into the program's memory, and when it hits that, it hands control back over to the debugger. So that's not, huge, it's not revolutionary, but it's just another trick, and there's a lot of these tricks out there. Any questions? Cool. So there's lots of anti-virtual machine tricks too, and really a lot of them are grouped into categories of the specific VM that you're in. So there's a bunch of tricks for VirtualBox. Cuckoo uses that. Cuckoo is an automated analysis for malware, if you guys didn't know that. There's a lot of VMware tricks, and there's a lot of parallel tricks. So some of them work, some of them don't, some of them are old. When I was going through them, yeah.
I have a question. Are there any visual indicators that alert the user that, if they're using a certain antivirus, that it detected it, or if they're they're using a certain debugger that it's detected that debugger? Like they may have done something wrong and sent it off?
So the question was, are there any visual indicators when you execute this executable that you've done something wrong, like you've attached a debugger and that there's some kind of defense mechanism that was tripped and it blocks you out or whatever? So the answer is yes and no. If you add a -i parameter, that means to install, it'll install it and there is no visual that the executable is running in memory. If you do not, if you if you don't have that -i, then it behaves as a normal program would with a command window, and it'll tell you if there is a debugger detected. It'll tell you if it's running in a virtual machine, stuff like that. So,
due to the variability of the difficulty, do you have difficulty levels set?
I'm glad you asked. That is in the next version. I was going to start making some tutorials and levels of like, this is what you should try and blah, blah, blah. But no, not right now.
Can you repeat the question?
I'm sorry. He asked, are there difficulty levels? Like, use the first anti-debugging technique because it's the easiest to bypass and detect and stuff like that. And like I said, no, not yet. Now it's kind of like a free-for-all, choose whatever you want, or execute it and get whatever you want. Like I said, there's a lot of anti-virtual machine tricks, and there's a few anti-sandbox techniques in there. So it'll look for common things that Sandboxy uses or Joe Sandbox uses, because they'll use the same processor ID, or they'll use the same MAC address, or they'll use the same whatever, or they have their own custom tools that are installed there. So I also wanted to emulate malware persistence, and I could only really think of like 4 or 5 things that common malware will do. By the way, I'm running most of this on Windows XP SP3, but I try to keep it so it'll run cleanly across Windows 7 and 64-bit versions. So if anyone can think of any other common means of persistence for malware, please let me know. Yeah, common to malware though. So also I wanted to invite like C2 communication, because a lot of malware will do this. It'll call home, it'll report back to someone of data it's stolen or whatever else. So I also built in server functionality, so it'll do what malware does, and it'll travel over HTTP, like making a post request or a GET request with some stolen data. I mean, it's not actually gathering any data, but you should be running this thing in a VM. But like older malware will use IRC. I've seen some malware use DNS, and a lot of malware will encrypt things with like a single XOR byte or multi-byte XOR, and you can specify what the key should be if you want to. So, this was a pretty short talk. I didn't mean to like blow you away with something like these other guys did, but I just want to tell you my future work will include, I'm going to actually make a builder, because right now it's just a bunch of code, and it'll execute dynamically based on random or parameters passed into it. And I want to make like a front end and like an actual tutorial and actually set it up as a real game instead of my own learning project. Use better encryption, like AES, triple DES, whatever else. Add an uninstall feature, because that might be important. Right now, as it is, like it gets to the end of the program, and right before it returns control of the OS, it just has a move file EX. And there's a really cool thing in there. You can say move file to null, and you can say delay the move until whatever. So I say delay the move to nothing, which means delete, and it just delays it until the computer reboots. So that's about it, but I should really add some more stuff in there. Because there's like, if I have it as a service, that may not work well. Anyways, also want to add like anti-tool code. Like, a lot of people will run Wireshark to see the network traffic, or a lot of people will run whatever, and that's not good to run these tools, some of these tools on your native VM. your victim VM. So you should really learn to set up a good lab environment. So that's what that was for. And actually have a hiding module, so it'll like jump in as a service or hollow out another process or whatever like that. Any questions?
No, am I supposed to look?
Oh.
Come on. There you go.
So would this also be good at maybe testing some of the techniques that prevent installs, like, for example, some of the things Rob talked about in his talk, with emit or the added ACLs and such?
So the question was, if I understand that, would this thing be used to prevent, to learn how to...
It is for testing, against the defenses. If you, added some of these, like, for instance, the things that Rob talked about in his free defenses talk this morning, where you're adding in some of those extra layers of defense on your enterprise. Hey, does this actually work in preventing certain things from being successful?
This isn't really meant for like enterprise environment. It was just like you should stick it in a VM and then start reversing it, or use a new.
I'll catch you after that.
Okay.
Where's the source code?
Yes, it's it's on my computer right now. I didn't want to. Yeah, I wanted to put it up into a private GitHub, but I didn't really know how GitHub worked with Visual Studio, and I've been having a lot of compiler issues lately. I swear to God, I hate Visual Studio so hard. 2010, just like C++, and it worked, and then I hit like compile again after adding a printf statement, and then suddenly there's all these linker errors. I'm just like, I should really make sure I know this stuff before I like inflict it on the public. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Cool.
This has been a presentation of Nova Hackers at ShmooCon Epilogue 2014, hosted by Mach37, brought to you by ComputeCycle. Video recording and streaming services provided by Cranial Thunder Productions.